Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Six Path Weeb. Today's fanfic dive takes us into an intriguing what-if scenario. What if Naruko was the Uzumaki witch? Part 3. Disclaimer, this channel's content is solely for entertainment and discussion. I don't own any anime footage included in these videos, all rights and credits belong to their respective creators and copyright holders. Let's dive right into it. Have you gotten everything in order? Professor McGonagall asked when Naruko and Coin Clink returned. Yes, I have, Naruko replied. Good. Let's head out, the professor said as Coin Clink guided them from the bank. Where do we begin? Naruko asked eagerly. We'll start with a trunk. This way, you can keep all your supplies together as we shop, McGonagall replied, leading the way. The trunk shop didn't look too impressive, but it had a variety of fascinating items. Naruko noticed some trunks had multiple compartments, accessed by different locks or by tapping them with a wand in the right spot. She picked a trunk that could expand to hold 3 compartments. Already curious, Naruko thought about studying the trunk's magical runes to see if she could improve it later on. When can I learn about runes, Professor? She asked as they moved toward Madame Malkin's robe shop. McGonagall, with a wave of her wand, made Naruko's trunk hover beside them. Naruko briefly wondered if she could ride on it, but thought McGonagall might not be amused by the idea. It's good that you're planning ahead. In third year, students get to choose electives along with their usual courses. Ancient Runes is one of them, along with Muggle Studies, Arithmancy, Care of Magical Creatures, and Divination, McGonagall said, with a slight frown at the mention of the last subject. Yeah. I don't think fortune telling is my thing, Naruko replied. That sounds like inviting trouble. As my grandpa always says, anything can happen. Wise advice. The future is never fixed. Even the most accurate prophecies are often vague and open to interpretation, McGonagall replied, holding the shop door open for Naruko. Naruko looked around the shop with a small frown. Why is everything so black and dark? If it helps, once you're sorted into one of the 4 houses, your robe's trim and accents will match your house colors. It's not a huge change, but it adds a bit of color, McGonagall reassured her. Can we wear casual clothes after classes? Naruko asked, stepping onto a stool as a tailor adjusted her robes. Yes, within reason. Your school uniform has white and gray elements, so it's not all black. And outside of formal events, you don't need to fully close your robe, the professor replied. That's something, Naruko said, feeling a bit more comfortable. She was then handed the standard Hogwarts uniform. Surprisingly, she found she didn't mind the skirt, which she normally didn't wear. She wondered if the uniforms were enchanted to feel comfortable. After all, in a magical world, anything seemed possible. All set, said the shop clerk after Naruko's fitting and adjustments were done. Next, they picked up her cauldron and potion supplies. Naruko decided to buy extra ingredients, sensing they might be useful during the year. She liked the idea of experimenting with potions and thought she might even create some new tools for her ninja training by pairing potions with seals. Their final stop was Flourish and Blots for books. McGonagall always saved the wand for last. Choosing the right wand often took time, and it was a highly anticipated moment for every new student. She had recently made an exception for another new student, Hermione Granger, a first-generation witch who adored books. For her, McGonagall had saved the bookstore as the last stop. At present, she found herself pondering whether she should have done the same for Naruko. While the young blonde didn't seem as eager to dive into every book immediately, as Hermione once did, she was undoubtedly captivated by the extensive collection of magical books. Naruko even made several additional purchases with such speed that Professor McGonagall had no time to intervene. Remind me again why you bought a book on curses? McGonagall asked dryly. Surprisingly, Naruko managed to glance back and forth between 1,000 magical herbs and fungi and magical drafts and potions simultaneously. I need to understand what enemy wizards and witches can do so I can defend myself if needed. It's kind of obvious, Naruko replied, her gaze fixed on the pages. Her ability to keep up with her surroundings while reading 2 books was impressive. Professor McGonagall sighed in response. They were heading to select Naruko's wand next. Afterward, if time permitted, they would explore a few pet stores if Naruko was interested. We've arrived, McGonagall said as Naruko quickly closed her books and stowed them away in the blink of an eye. Ollivanders. Makers of fine wands since 382 BC, Naruko read aloud, murmuring, that seems really old. Whether the date is accurate or not, Ollivander is regarded as the finest wand maker in magical Britain, Professor McGonagall replied. She herself was uncertain about the authenticity of the claim and privately doubted the legendary origins, despite the store owner's fervent belief. Naruko was thrilled about this part of her shopping trip, which had been enjoyable overall. She couldn't wait to see what kind of wand she'd receive. Upon entering, she immediately asked, "What's the best type of wand?" "All of our wands are crafted to the highest standard, each with its own unique strengths. There isn't a best type beyond an Ollivander wand, if I may be so bold," replied a wizened man with large eyes. Naruko smiled and introduced herself. "I'm Naruko Uzumaki. Are you Ollivander?" "Indeed, I am. I remember your mother's wand vividly, a superb tool for both charms and transfiguration. 9 inches, flexible, cherry wood, with a dragon heartstring core," he recounted. Naruko thought it sounded like a fine wand. "It's good to see you again, Professor McGonagall," Ollivander added. "I would recite your wand's details, but I'd grow weary with all your visits to assist new students." "Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. I take great care of it, as always," she replied with a smile. Ollivander turned back to Naruko. "Now then, let's find you a wand. Remember, however, that it's the wand that chooses the witch or wizard." "How does that work?" Naruko asked. "No one really knows, it's pure magic," he replied, gesturing toward a stool by the counter. Naruko climbed up. "Which is your dominant hand?" he inquired. "Left," she replied, extending her hand. A tape measure floated over, taking meticulous measurements as Ollivander selected wands. Naruko soon found herself playfully swatting at the tape measure as it seemed to measure everything, even her whisker marks. "Enough," Ollivander commanded as the tape crumbled onto the counter. "Try this, 10 inches, elm, unicorn hair," he said, handing her a wand. Naruko waved it, causing a burst of energy. "Too lively," he observed, retrieving it. He handed her another, and again, she tried, but nothing happened. 5 wands later. "Don't worry, Naruko, it often takes time," Professor McGonagall reassured her, and Ollivander nodded in agreement. 37 wands later. "Oh, this is intriguing," Ollivander exclaimed. "Give this one a try." Weak sparks sputtered out before dying. Ollivander's eyes sparkled with excitement. What felt like half the shop, though it was only 42 wands later. "What about that one?" Naruko asked, pointing to a wand that seemed to emit a faint glow within its box. "An unusual combination," Ollivander said, intrigued. "Not one of the standard core types, but exceptional nonetheless. I acquired it in America while studying new wand-making techniques. 9¼ inches, reed wood, and White River monster spine core." Naruko felt an instant connection to it. She held it, concentrating, and a soft light emerged. "That's it," Ollivander shouted excitedly. "Yes, that's a splendid wand. Reed wands suit those who are bold, eloquent, and deeply protective of loved ones. The core is powerful and refined, a rare and harmonious match." Naruko wasn't sure how eloquent she was, though her friends claimed she was naturally good with people. Yet, bold and protective fit her well. She admired the wand, already feeling as if it were an extension of herself. "It feels just right," she said, carefully handling it to avoid accidental magic. The gentle light it emitted was fascinating, though she didn't want to risk triggering anything else. "That felt like it took forever," Naruko remarked as they left the wand shop. "We still have time for one more stop if you're interested," McGonagall said. "Students are allowed to bring a pet, either an owl, a toad, or a cat. Though, if the pet is small and well behaved, exceptions are sometimes made." Naruko liked the idea of having a pet. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something," she said to her professor. "Go ahead." Naruko hesitated, glancing aside and blushing a little. "I was wondering if there's a way I can stay in touch with my friends back home while I'm at Hogwarts." "There is. Owls serve as our postal system, and they can even reach your homeland. There are protocols for international correspondence, but you may want to consult your Hokage for specifics. Your mother, Kushina, often sent letters home during her time here and even kept in touch with a few friends after graduating. It sounds like you'll want an owl, and, as it happens, we're right in front of the correct store," Professor McGonagall said, gesturing toward the building. Outside the store labeled Ilops Owl Emporium, they observed a variety of owls displayed in cages, each accompanied by a sign listing available owl species and prices. The list noted the availability of exotic species from time to time, though their prices varied. Upon entering, Naruko was struck by the sheer number of owls inside, perched or caged throughout the store. She felt an immediate fondness for the shop, appreciating the sight of so many owls, which she associated with good luck and protection in the magical world. As she surveyed the store, Naruko admired the diversity of the owls, each unique in size and shape. However, she aimed to choose an owl that could blend into her world, mindful not to attract unnecessary attention through her letters. Eventually, she reached the section for exotic owls and found a Ural owl, recognizable by its resemblance to a tawny owl yet distinguished by its larger size and unique gray-brown feathers with dark streaks. Its face bore gray discs bordered by dark brown, complemented by small black eyes and an orange-yellow beak. The owl tilted its head, giving Naruko a curious hoot that seemed welcoming. Smiling, she extended her finger toward it, and the owl responded with a gentle, affectionate nip. Laughing softly, Naruko asked, "Would you like to come with me, buddy?" The owl hooted in response, bobbing its head enthusiastically. Naruko then approached the store clerk and inquired, "How much for this one?" 17 galleons. The species is uncommon around here, and that price includes a cage and a starter kit, the clerk replied. Perfect. I'll take him, along with a couple of extra bags of treats, she decided. The owl seemed delighted, hooting excitedly as Naruko completed her purchase. Back in her room at the Leaky Cauldron, Naruko asked her new companion, "What should I call you?" The owl hooted, perched comfortably on her arm. Chuckling, she mused, "That doesn't help much," while contemplating names aloud. "You're far too distinguished for a simple name like Fujin," she remarked, noting the owl's apparent approval as it bobbed its head. Maybe not Kaze Kami either, she thought, observing the bird's subtle disdain at the suggestion. After a pause, she smiled. "How about Fukami? It translates roughly to God of Wind Release," she suggested. After a brief moment, the owl responded with an approving hoot, signaling his acceptance. "Fukami it is, then," she confirmed, rewarding him with a treat as he settled happily on the room's owl perch, attentively watching her as she read. Just before dinner, a knock sounded at Naruko's door. "Come in," she called, glancing up from her herbology and potions texts. Professor McGonagall entered, taking a moment to study the young girl engrossed in her studies. Despite her usual formality, the professor decided to share a candid observation. "You seem quite interested in potions," McGonagall remarked. Naruko nodded, looking attentive as the professor continued. "I should offer a word of advice. Our potions master, Professor Snape, is extremely skilled but not known for his warmth. He can be challenging to impress and, at times, difficult to approach. However, those who succeed under his guidance often excel professionally." Naruko's expression grew thoughtful as she processed this. "Does he push students out of his class?" she asked. "Rarely, though accidents occasionally necessitate medical attention," McGonagall replied. Naruko smiled, determined. "I can handle that. I'll just work harder and make sure I achieve top marks," she declared, a hint of mischievous confidence in her eyes. The professor allowed herself a small smile. "Perhaps my warning wasn't necessary," she conceded. Naruko shook her head. "All information is useful, even if it's just to know how to navigate around it." With a slight nod of approval, McGonagall responded, "Very well, ninja wisdom." She then invited, "It's nearly time for dinner. Perhaps you'd like to join me, and I can answer any questions you have, or tell you a bit about your mother." Naruko beamed and quickly gathered her things. "Let's go," she replied eagerly, leading the way downstairs. After finishing their meal, Naruko began to ask questions. She learned about the different houses at Hogwarts, though Professor McGonagall declined to reveal the sorting process. Naruko also discovered a lot about Quidditch, a popular wizarding sport. It was clear that Professor McGonagall was an enthusiastic supporter, especially of her house's team. "What was my mother like?" Naruko eventually inquired. Professor McGonagall's eyes softened as she remembered the red-haired woman. She was a remarkable individual, both strong and graceful in her later years. She exuded a maturity that often surprised others. She loved learning and made many friends at Hogwarts. People were naturally drawn to her, though she rarely noticed it herself. Many admired her deeply. Unfortunately, after she graduated, dark times followed. She paused, reflecting. Or perhaps that was when we realized just how troubled things had become. The professor chuckled to lighten the mood. Kushina was quite the troublemaker in her early years, though that only added to her charm. She had a temper but was never reckless. She excelled in charms, transfiguration, my subject, and care for magical creatures. You must meet Hagrid, our groundskeeper. Your mother was quite fond of him and often helped him." McGonagall laughed again. She claimed it was her excuse to escape the stuffy, albeit grand, castle. She loved studying but couldn't sit still for long. Naruko laughed in agreement, That sounded just like her. From what the Hokage has told me and from what I've observed, you share many traits with her, McGonagall noted. Oddly enough, she wasn't very fond of flying. She didn't mind hovering, but actual flight was a different matter. She preferred finding her own, ninja-like ways to get around, McGonagall added. Flying sounds fun to me, Naruko said, eyes sparkling with excitement. You'll actually have the opportunity this year, McGonagall replied, amused by Naruko's eagerness. Really? But I thought first years weren't allowed a broom? True, first years can't own a broom, but everyone takes flying lessons. It's rare for a student to have broomstick experience beyond a simple toy broom. A few may have flown with a parent, but that's uncommon, McGonagall explained. Yet another reason to look forward to Hogwarts. Naruko grinned. The two continued chatting, with Naruko asking many questions, and McGonagall answering most, though occasionally dodging a few with a mischievous glint in her eye. The next morning, Naruko woke up, eager to return to Konoha but equally excited about her upcoming Hogwarts journey. She wished she could have stayed up longer the previous night, learning more about her mother. During breakfast, McGonagall provided final instructions. On September 1st, you'll need to reach platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station. The train departs at 11 a.m. sharp. She handed Naruko a small wizard hat trinket. This is a specialized portkey. We discussed portkeys briefly last night. This will transport you directly to King's Cross before 11 a.m. It can also bring you back to the designated apparition and portkey area, an exclusive lounge for wizards. It's so small, Naruko said, slightly worried about losing it. It's highly enchanted and can't be lost. Should you misplace it, it will find its way back to you when needed, McGonagall assured her. That's impressive, Naruko said, examining it with admiration. McGonagall smiled. Your mother created it herself to ease travel between worlds. After she was gone, it mysteriously reappeared and was given to me when I was assigned to assist you. Your family has remarkable talents, Naruko. Naruko held the trinket close, deciding to make it into a necklace to keep it safe. I'll treasure it, she said with determination. Good to know. Your mother would be proud, McGonagall said gently, giving Naruko a moment to hold the trinket. When you reach King's Cross, head toward the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Focus on platform 9 3/4, and you'll be fine. What about my trunk and Fukami's cage? Naruko asked, glancing at her owl. McGonagall smiled. Nice to see you've named him. He seemed to like it, Naruko replied, smiling as Fukami bobbed his head. Look for a blue and yellow sign with uniformed helpers. They'll assist you with your belongings. McGonagall offered her hand, and with a pop, they disappeared. In an instant, Naruko and McGonagall appeared in the Hokage's office. Welcome back. How did it go? The Hokage asked. Naruko grinned. Of course, it went well. It's me, after all. The Hokage chuckled. I wouldn't expect anything less. Turning to Naruko, McGonagall said, It was wonderful meeting you, Naruko. I hope Hogwarts will be equally enjoyable. I look forward to seeing you in class. Naruko smiled warmly and, without warning, hugged the professor. Surprised, McGonagall glanced at the Hokage, who gave an approving nod. Hesitantly, the stern professor returned the embrace, her expression softening. Seems you have a new friend, the Hokage remarked, eyeing the owl. I do. His name is Fukami, Naruko replied proudly, as Fukami gave an acknowledging hoot. Naruko figured he was acclimating to his new environment, preparing for cross-world flights. I also thought he'd be a great way to stay in touch while I'm away. Good thinking. Our postal upgrades will allow correspondence even across worlds, though it might be slow initially. And it's fortunate he's a familiar owl breed here. I'm glad to have found him, Naruko agreed, nodding. As they continued discussing her trip and her mother, the Hokage explained how they'd address letters and warned that urgent messages might arrive by summoned creature, disguised to blend in with the magical world. After leaving the Hokage's office, Naruko headed home. Relieved to hear that her rent would be automatically covered, she also thought about linking funds between her account in Konoha and her family vault at Gringotts. She'd explore this with Coin Clink and hopefully find a less cumbersome solution than manually exchanging funds. In what felt like no time at all, Naruko found herself preparing to leave for Hogwarts. She had numerous conversations with her teammates and Lulu, keeping them updated, and even visited her other friends to share the same, carefully crafted account she had provided her team. She made sure everyone important to her knew how they could stay in touch throughout the year, and introduced them all to her owl. Unsurprisingly, Fukami was a big hit among her friends, and he seemed to relish the attention. Before leaving, Naruko made a point to increase the security measures at her apartment, ensuring its safety during her absence. Hinata, Ino, and even Lulu all promised to check in on it regularly for her peace of mind. Standing before the Hokage's desk, Naruko took a deep breath. "I'm leaving, Gigi," she said. "Safe travels," he replied warmly, offering a gentle smile. Naruko blinked back a few tears and gripped her portkey tightly before disappearing in a swift pop. Moments later, she reappeared in a cozy, well-decorated room bustling with activity. "I've arrived," she whispered, stepping out of the lounge. She felt a thrill of anticipation for what awaited her in her first year at Hogwarts, knowing she was more than ready for this new chapter. And she hoped Hogwarts was ready for her. A young boy, small for his age, sat patiently on a trunk beside a caged owl, glancing around the bustling King's Cross station. He had been waiting here for some time, or so it felt. Living with his aunt, uncle, and cousin, the Dursley family, was challenging. He barely considered them family, only using the term loosely. His name was Harry Potter. Harry lived with his relatives because his parents had passed away when he was too young to remember them. His only memory was a fleeting vision of voices calling his name and a sinister laugh followed by a bright green flash. He now knew that the laugh belonged to Voldemort and that the green light was a curse that had taken his parents' lives. A month ago, on his 11th birthday, he discovered he was a wizard. The revelation of his magical heritage and his acceptance into a school called Hogwarts thrilled him. During a shopping trip for school supplies, he learned more about his parents from Hagrid, a towering man with a kind heart. It was a day filled with amazement and joy, as he had never imagined that preparing for school could be so exciting. Despite Hagrid's guidance, however, he hadn't explained how to reach platform 9 3/4. Harry knew the platform number and the time to board, but the process remained a mystery. His uncle had mockingly suggested, the loonies probably didn't even get the platform right, before hurrying off, leaving Harry to figure it out alone. Harry arrived early at the station, and the wait had grown frustrating. Attempts to ask passers-by about platform 9 3/4 were met with blank stares or dismissive laughs, leaving him sitting in oversized clothes and sighing beside his owl, Hedwig. Out of boredom, he murmured, "What do you think, Hedwig? Will I ever make it to Hogwarts?" As he sat, a girl with bright blonde hair styled in twin pigtails caught his attention, passing by a few times with a thoughtful expression. She had a friendly face with curious whisker-like marks on her cheeks, and Harry couldn't help but find her intriguing. Caught looking, he quickly looked away, feeling his face flush. "Excuse me," she said, approaching him with a gentle smile. Harry pretended not to hear her, embarrassed at being caught. "Excuse me," she repeated, louder this time. When he looked up, she leaned closer with a curious expression. "Are you, by any chance, heading to Hogwarts as well?" she asked softly. Surprised and eager, Harry nodded. "I am. Are you?" She giggled. "Yes, I am. It would be strange to carry a trunk and an owl otherwise," she teased gently, making him smile. "I can't figure out how to reach the platform," he admitted. "Me neither. I know what to do once we get there, but I keep getting distracted. There's so much to see here," she said, glancing around with wonder. Harry offered to lead the way toward platforms 9 and 10, and she explained, "We just need to focus on platform 9 3/4 and walk through the barrier." She introduced herself as Naruko Uzumaki, and they exchanged smiles. Harry, feeling hopeful, told her, "I'm Harry Potter. I didn't know about Hogwarts until my letter arrived. Did you?" Naruko shook her head. "Not really. My letter came almost a year ago. My birthday is October 10th, so it was after the school year had already begun." She glanced at his owl and smiled. "Your owl is lovely. What's her name?" "Her name's Hedwig. I found it in a book," Harry said proudly. "What's your owl's name?" She gestured toward her owl with a warm smile. "This is Fukami. He's a Ural owl, uncommon around here. His name means wind god, which seemed fitting." Finally, they arrived at the barrier. Naruko took a deep breath and confidently ran through it, vanishing. Gathering his courage, Harry followed suit, and the platform appeared before him, filled with bustling wizards and witches saying their goodbyes. "Wow, that's amazing," Naruko exclaimed, looking at the vibrant red train with excitement. After spotting station staff in conductor-like uniforms, they received assistance loading their trunks. One of the staff members chuckled, "We're from the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Transportation. This is a nice break from desk work." As they settled into a train compartment, Naruko asked, "How do we get our trunks down later?" "You don't need to worry," reassured the taller student. You can reach it by standing on the seat, or perhaps the two of you could grab it together if you need to. Once you reach Hogwarts, leave your belongings on the train, and they'll be magically sent to your room after you're assigned a house and pick a bed. Naruko nodded in understanding, and she and Harry thanked the students as they left. Naruko moved to the window, gazing out with excitement. This is incredible. How long do you think the train ride will be? She asked, her brows furrowing slightly in anticipation, as though concentrating might hurry the train along. No idea, replied Harry, joining her at the window. I wish we were there already. Hogwarts is somewhere in Scotland, so it's likely a few hours. Plus, we boarded pretty early. Better early than late, Naruko agreed. After a few more moments at the window, she took a seat, with Harry following suit. So, who helped you get your school supplies? Naruko asked. Harry smiled, recalling his experience. A man named Hagrid. He's enormous, almost like two people. He was very kind, but he only told me the platform number and time. He didn't explain how to get there. I was told to find time to speak with him once I get to school. He's the groundskeeper, right? Naruko inquired. Harry nodded. I heard he knew my mother well when she was here. She was a witch, Naruko shared, a brief look of sorrow crossing her face. Both my parents passed away shortly after I was born. I'm sorry, Harry said softly. Naruko offered a reassuring smile. It's all right. I've learned a lot about her now, at least, the magical side of her. That's good. My parents died too, Harry replied. Hagrid told me about them while we shopped for my school things. Naruko nodded empathetically. That was very kind of him. Not wanting to dwell on the topic, Harry changed the subject. So, who helped you? For me, it was Professor McGonagall, Naruko replied with a small smile. She knew my mom quite well and shared a few stories. She also told me a lot about Hogwarts, but wouldn't reveal how we get sorted. She said it's a surprise. I didn't think to ask Hagrid about that, Harry said, feeling a bit nervous. I hope it's not some sort of test. I'm sure it's nothing too daunting, Naruko reassured him. After all, we're not allowed to practice magic outside of school. What could they even test us on? Their conversation was interrupted by the compartment door sliding open. Oh. Sorry, I didn't realize this was taken, stammered a tall, red-haired boy with freckles and a smudge of dirt on his nose. Naruko smiled and gestured for him to stay. There's plenty of room. You're welcome to join us, she said, giving Harry a look that left no room for disagreement. Yes, of course, Harry added. With a grin, Naruko chuckled, that makes 3 of us now. As the train started moving, Ron explained, my older brothers offered to help me with my trunk, but I didn't trust them. Fred and George are notorious pranksters. No problem, it was light, Harry replied. My mum cast a featherlight charm on it, Ron said, introducing himself. I'm Ron Weasley, he added, extending his hand. Harry Potter, Harry responded, shaking it. Really? Do you have the scar? Ron asked eagerly, and Harry showed it to him, earning a look of admiration. Ron turned to Naruko, momentarily surprised by the whisker-like marks on her face. He decided they somehow suited her. Thanks for letting me join you. Everywhere else seemed like everyone was already friends. Naruko laughed, I understand. I'm Naruko Uzumaki, but just call me Naruko. Great to meet you both, Ron said. So, which house do you think you'll be in? No idea, Naruko admitted. Just not Slytherin, Harry said. Agreed. My family's always been in Gryffindor, so I'm hoping I'll end up there, Ron said confidently. I just wish someone would explain the sorting process, Naruko sighed. Fred and George told me you have to wrestle a troll in your underwear to join Gryffindor, Ron said with a grin. Though, there's no way my older brother Percy would have made it if that were true. Naruko laughed, and soon all 3 were talking excitedly about Hogwarts. The trolley lady stopped by with snacks, and they shared sandwiches, snacks, and laughter, making the trip feel even more magical. Ron introduced his pet rat, Scabbers, and was just about to attempt a spell his brothers taught him when the compartment door opened slightly. A large toad hopped in, landing next to Naruko with a curious croak. Naruko looked to Harry and Ron, who only shrugged in response, and cautiously reached out to touch the toad, amused by this unexpected encounter. The compartment door opened, revealing a young boy in school uniform, round-faced with dark brown hair. Trevor, he exclaimed, relieved. Blushing slightly, he looked to the others. I'm really sorry. I thought he was in his tank, but I guess he escaped when the workers loaded it onto the train. I've been holding him this whole time, but he managed to slip away. The boy quickly peered out of the compartment, calling to someone nearby, "He's in here." Then he gently retrieved the toad, sighing. "Sorry, I need a moment to catch my breath. I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom," he introduced himself. At that moment, a girl also in uniform entered. "Finally. I told you to keep a better eye on him. Do you have a plan to keep him contained once we're at Hogwarts?" Her front teeth were prominent, and her frizzy hair framed her serious expression. Sorry, Hermione," Neville murmured, looking downcast. "Well, what matters is that you found him," Naruko said, offering him a reassuring smile. "You're right," Neville responded, his spirits lifting. He nodded firmly, holding his toad, who gave Naruko a curious look. "I'm glad you did," Hermione added, her tone softer now as she averted her gaze, perhaps realizing her initial tone had been harsh. She glanced back up and noted, "We're almost there, everyone should start getting dressed soon." Ron gave her a skeptical look, clearly unimpressed by her authoritative tone. "I'm Naruko Uzumaki, by the way. Just call me Naruko," she said, extending a friendly introduction to Neville. "Nice to meet you, Naruko, and sorry again about Trevor," Neville replied with a sheepish grin. Following Naruko's lead, Harry introduced himself. "I'm Harry Potter." "Really?" Neville asked, with a curious smile. Harry, relieved, noticed Neville didn't ask to see his scar, a refreshing change. "And I'm Ron Weasley," Ron interjected, clearly aiming his words toward Neville rather than Hermione. Hermione Granger," the girl said, recovering from her earlier scolding. Turning to Harry, she lit up. "I've read all about you in books." Harry blinked. "I'm in books?" "Yes. Modern magical history, the rise and fall of the dark arts, and great wizarding events of the 20th century." Hermione listed with a sense of pride in her knowledge. She continued, "Most of it is speculation, though, especially about you-know-who's downfall." "Voldemort. His name is Voldemort," Naruko interjected firmly. The group, except Harry, shuddered at the name. Hermione flinched only slightly, while the boys seemed visibly uncomfortable. "You shouldn't say that name," Ron warned quietly, "it's bad luck." "Even I don't say it, and I'm Muggle-born," Hermione admitted. Naruko rolled her eyes, and Harry looked puzzled as to why everyone seemed so fearful of Voldemort's name. Changing the topic, Neville ventured, "So, who's your Quidditch team?" Ron immediately perked up, eagerly diving into an enthusiastic account of Quidditch, particularly praising the Chudley Cannons, his favorite team. Neville joined in, discussing the game with Harry, who listened intently, admitting he knew little about it. Naruko found their excitement amusing, although the game sounded a bit too complex for her taste. Meanwhile, Hermione sat next to Naruko. "Attempting to break the ice," she commented, "boys, right?" Naruko smiled knowingly, sensing Hermione's attempt to befriend her. "I suppose. Quidditch does sound fun to watch. So, are you Muggle-born?" Hermione nodded. "Yes, I didn't even know about magic until my letter arrived. Some odd things happened around me, but I never thought it was magic. My parents were worried, but Professor McGonagall explained everything to them. How about you?" "My mom was a witch. I don't know much about the wizarding world, though, since she and my dad died when I was born. Professor McGonagall helped me get ready for school and told me a little about her. Apparently, my family has a vault at Gringotts. They kept it for those of us who need it when starting at Hogwarts," Naruko explained, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "I like Professor McGonagall too. She seems strict, but that's good," Hermione replied. "My dad insisted on carrying my trunk, saying he wanted to help his little girl before she went off to school." Naruko chuckled, and just then, they heard Scabbers, Ron's pet rat, squeak. "Is that a rat?" Hermione asked. "Yeah, he's mine," Ron replied defensively. "But didn't the letter specify toads, cats, or owls?" Hermione questioned, unintentionally sounding critical. Naruko intervened, "Yes, it did, but Professor McGonagall said they're flexible as long as the pet isn't a bother." "Oh, all right then," Hermione said, appeased. Ron, encouraged by Naruko's intervention, explained, "Percy gave me Scabbers when I got my Hogwarts letter." "I got Trevor from my uncle for the same reason," Neville added, adjusting his grip on his elusive toad. "He loves escaping his tank. I don't even know how he manages it half the time." "Maybe he's a ninja toad," Ron joked, earning laughs from the group. Naruko, however, studied Trevor closely, wondering if he might indeed have some unique training. Neville asked about everyone's pets, prompting Hermione to admit, "I wanted a cat, But my parents said I have to wait until my 3rd year. She looked a bit disappointed. I have an owl, a snowy white one named Hedwig, Harry said, beaming. I also have an owl. He's a Ural owl from Ilops. I named him Fukami, meaning wind god, Naruko explained. They sound lovely, Hermione remarked. I hope I get to see them at Hogwarts. Where do they stay at the school? There's an owlery, Ron replied, warming up to Hermione. You can visit your owl whenever you like, as long as it's during curfew. Owls are quite smart, they return to the owlery at night on their own. Naruko added, I loved seeing all the owls at Ilops. The morning post at Hogwarts must be impressive. Ron nodded, describing how the owls delivered mail each morning in the Great Hall. Their cheerful conversation was abruptly interrupted when the compartment door slid open again. 3 boys stood there, with Draco Malfoy in the middle. They say Harry Potter is here, Draco drawled, casting a condescending look around the compartment. The group's mood darkened immediately. Hermione instinctively shifted closer to Naruko, who met Draco's gaze coolly. Not exactly polite to barge in uninvited, she said, unimpressed. Draco ignored her remark and introduced himself with a forced formality. I'm Draco Malfoy, and these are Crabbe and Goyle. My name is Naruko Uzumaki, Naruko replied calmly. Draco paused, recognizing the name. His father had always advised caution around the Uzumaki family, known for their influence and restraint. Draco decided he would keep an eye on her. Before Draco could continue, Ron almost growled, What do you want, Malfoy? Looking Ron up and down with disdain, Draco sneered, Ah, a Weasley. I could tell by the shabby clothes and dirt on your nose. Ignoring him, Draco turned to Hermione. And you are? Hermione Granger, she replied tensely, sensing the tension rise in the compartment. Draco's eyes narrowed, showing a hint of disdain as he addressed Hermione. Muggle-born, are you? His tone was cold, echoing the elitist views drilled into him by his family. Hermione, however, remained composed, not rising to his provocation. Naruko glanced at Draco with a warning look, causing him to hesitate before turning his attention to the last person in the compartment. You must be Harry Potter. You should have mentioned that when we first met at Madame Malkin's. But then, it was a quick encounter, wasn't it? My mother would have been beside herself if my robes hadn't been perfect, so the tailors took extra care with me, he said, extending his hand with a faint smile. You'll soon learn that some wizards are superior to others. I can help you with that, he added, his smile fading when Harry didn't reciprocate the gesture. Thank you, but no. I believe I can work it out on my own, Harry replied calmly. Ron smirked in amusement, and Draco's expression twisted in irritation. Come on, Crabbe, Goyle. Let's not waste our time here, he huffed before leaving the compartment and closing the door behind him. Neville exhaled in relief, sinking back in his seat. That was intense. Brilliant, that was, Ron laughed. Language, Hermione muttered out of habit, but Ron didn't notice. He clapped a hand on Harry's shoulder. You really showed him. The stuck-up git thinks he can just walk over people. Everyone knows his family's history, his folks were in you-know-who's inner circle. They only escaped punishment because they had enough money to bribe the right people. I didn't like him either, Harry, Naruko admitted sincerely. Though, maybe there was a better way to handle that. Ron shrugged. Doesn't matter, he said, biting into a chocolate frog before it could leap away. Harry and Naruko had learned earlier that they had to be quick to catch them. Naruko caught hers on the first try, though Harry's managed to hop out the window to freedom. Hermione frowned slightly. I didn't appreciate him calling me a muggle-born like that. No surprise there, Ron said. The worst kind of purebloods think they're superior and that muggle-born shouldn't be allowed to practice magic. They're all like that. Harry glanced at Ron, a bit unsettled. What kind of enemy did I just make? The worst kind, Naruko replied with a small chuckle. Think of it like having a schoolyard rival, the kind who'll make things difficult for you. He won't cause serious harm, but he'll definitely try to get under your skin. You chose Ron over him. Hey! Ron protested, only half offended. Naruko smiled, reassuring him. Don't worry, Ron. I'd choose you over him any day. I'd rather be friends with you all than someone like Draco. Her words brought a pleased smile to Hermione's face as she picked up a sweet from their pile, enjoying the treat since her parents, both dentists, weren't there to monitor her intake. Right you are, Ron said heartily. Even me? Neville asked shyly. Of course, Naruko replied warmly. Who else could I talk to about Quidditch? Ron said, nudging Neville and handing Harry another collectible card for his budding collection. Hermione murmured quietly, "I like that," a sentiment that only Naruko and Harry seemed to hear. Harry grinned, satisfied. "I told Draco I could figure things out for myself, and I think I already have." After Draco left, Hermione ushered Harry, Ron, and Neville out so Naruko could change. "We'd have waited anyway," Ron grumbled, holding his uniform as he walked down the train's corridor. Hermione insisted they change in one of the nearby stalls for extra privacy for Naruko. Hermione turned to stand guard, but when she looked back, Naruko was already dressed, shrugging with a sheepish grin. "Guess I got used to quick changes, always running close to the school bell," she explained, and Hermione nodded, satisfied with the excuse. As the boys returned, they noticed the sky outside had grown dark. "It's been a long journey," Naruko remarked. "But not a bad one," Harry added, nodding in agreement as the train slowed to a stop. Hermione tucked away her book, Neville checked on his toad, Trevor, and Ron looked eagerly into the hall at the other students. "What about our trunks?" Hermione asked as she packed her book away. "We leave them here," Naruko explained. "I asked earlier, and they said our trunks will appear once we're assigned beds." Ron laughed, seeing a few students hauling their trunks, only to be instructed by a prefect to leave them behind. As the students began disembarking, the younger ones moved excitedly, while the older ones seemed more composed. Harry felt eager to exit as Hermione, Neville, Ron, and Naruko followed closely. Outside, they found themselves in a crowd of black robes and colorful scarves heading toward a line of carriages. Naruko seemed momentarily shocked by the sight, though Ron assumed it was just wonder at more magical transport. Through the noise, Harry heard a familiar voice calling, "First years. This way, follow me." It was Hagrid. "What about the carriages?" a young girl asked him, but Hagrid replied, "We're taking another route," then reminded a few students to leave their trunks, which they did, blushing in embarrassment. "Hey, Hagrid!" Harry called, pleased to see his friend. Naruko whispered, "You weren't exaggerating," as she looked at Hagrid. "Everything all right, Harry?" Hagrid asked, beaming at him. Harry nodded, ready to introduce Naruko, but Hagrid's attention was quickly pulled back to the crowd. Naruko reassured Harry, "Don't worry. We'll meet properly later." Harry sighed but agreed. He looked forward to introducing her, perhaps it was the novelty of having a friend to share with Hagrid. With everyone gathered, Hagrid called them to follow him. "Keep hold of that toad," he warned Neville, who held Trevor tightly despite the other students' chuckles. Hagrid led them to boats along the lake shore. "No more than 5 to a boat," he instructed. Harry, Ron, Neville, Naruko, and Hermione shared one, while Draco, accompanied by Crabbe, Goyle, and a couple of other students, settled into another. When all were seated, Hagrid tapped the side of his boat, and they began gliding across the lake in eerie silence. The water was so still it looked like glass under the moonlight, broken only by an occasional fish jumping before disappearing below the surface. "Welcome to Hogwarts," Hagrid announced as they rounded a bend, and the castle came into view, towering atop a cliff, its windows illuminated in the darkness. The sight left everyone, even Draco, speechless with awe. "This is amazing," Naruko murmured beside Harry, who could only nod in agreement. Hermione could barely contain her excitement. Hagrid finally announced, "Mind your heads." The boats glided across the lake, drawing closer to a wide cave nestled at the base of the castle, its ceiling low and arching. Inside, it was dimly lit, save for a few lanterns bobbing on the water, illuminating their path. As they ventured further, they arrived at what appeared to be an underground harbor, brilliantly lit by torches affixed to the walls. The boats came to a halt at a series of piers that led up to a staircase, presumably the entrance to the castle. "Be careful disembarking," Hagrid advised the group. "Is everyone still with us?" Hagrid inquired, a grin spreading across his face. "We didn't lose anyone to the squid, did we?" A few first years chuckled at his jest. "Follow me," he instructed, leading them onward. They approached a large wooden door adorned with brass knockers. Hagrid rapped on the door with his massive fist, the sound reverberating through the air. Harry imagined it echoing throughout the castle. When the door swung open, a tall, stern woman clad in emerald green robes stood before them, scrutinizing each student with an attentive gaze. Naruko offered a tentative smile but restrained herself from waving at the professor. Harry felt compelled to straighten up as their eyes met. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid announced proudly, gesturing toward the group. "Indeed," she replied briskly. "Follow me." With that, she began to walk, and the first years hurried to keep pace. Harry caught Hagrid's whisper, "Good luck," accompanied by a wink before the half-giant departed in another direction. Focusing on not lagging behind, Harry's excitement mingled with anxiety as he followed Professor McGonagall. He eagerly anticipated beginning his studies in magic. As students at Hogwarts, you will each be assigned to one of 4 houses. Your house will serve as your home during your time here, much like a family. You will earn points for your house through achievements, and misbehavior will result in point deductions. The houses are Hufflepuff, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Gryffindor, each with its own rich history, Professor McGonagall elaborated to the gathered first years. In a few moments, I will return, and you will form a line to enter the Great Hall. When your name is called, you will step forward for your sorting. Please make yourselves presentable and await my return, she instructed before disappearing through the doors. Make ourselves presentable? Is this some sort of test? Harry whispered anxiously to Naruko. Doesn't that just mean to look sharp? She replied, bemused. Harry nodded, attempting to calm his racing heart. It was challenging, especially with Hermione murmuring everything she had absorbed about magic from her books. He found himself wishing he could go back in time to study more thoroughly, even though Naruko insisted it wasn't a test. Ron appeared to be nervously rubbing his nose, as if preparing for an upcoming challenge. Given the twins' tales, Harry wouldn't have been surprised if Ron was mentally rehearsing wrestling moves, even if that seemed ridiculous. A small part of him felt oddly satisfied to see Draco looking a bit apprehensive himself, despite the boy's attempts to maintain an air of superiority. Amidst the flurry of nerves, Naruko appeared notably composed. I hope I get sorted into a good house. I want nice housemates. Please, let me have supportive roommates. She thought, only slightly panicking. She would deny feeling anything but confidence if anyone dared to suggest otherwise. After all, she was destined to become Hokage, unshakable and fearless. Suddenly, a girl at the front, sporting short blonde pigtails, screamed, "GG ghosts." She clung to a red-haired girl with a long braid, clearly terrified. The other first years looked up just in time to see a group of translucent ghosts drifting through a wall and into another. Naruko felt a shiver of unease. She had never been fond of ghosts. The apparitions glowed faintly, their semi-transparent forms floating gracefully. I say. What are you lot doing here? One ghost exclaimed, his attire stained with what appeared to be silvery blood. He resembled a pirate, sans eye patch, and sported a ghostly sword tucked into his belt. Oh. New students. First years, indeed. We haven't missed the sorting, have we, good Baron? Another ghost chimed in, this one a rotund friar. I don't recall first years being this small. The last batch was much bigger, the Baron remarked. That's because time has passed, and children grow, the fat friar replied matter-of-factly. Fine. If you say so, the Baron huffed before gliding away at a brisk pace. I hope to see some of you in Hufflepuff. That's my house. Welcome to Hogwarts. The friar added warmly, flashing a friendly smile before departing, one of the last ghosts to leave. Naruko's fear of ghosts began to dissipate. They appeared oddly human, even if they were specters. Perhaps witnessing their existence was enough to quell her apprehensions. However, there was little time for reflection, as Professor McGonagall reappeared and opened the doors for them. Once they were lined up, she guided them into the next chamber. The room was illuminated by magical candles that floated above 4 long tables stretching the length of the dining hall. The ceiling, enchanted to mimic the night sky, twinkled with stars. It's enchanted to reflect the sky outside, Hermione whispered in awe to those around her. Both Harry and Naruko gazed upward in wonder. At the front of the hall, a table occupied by adults caught Harry's eye. He easily spotted Hagrid, as well as the living embodiment of his first chocolate frog card, Albus Dumbledore. All eyes were drawn to an old, tattered hat perched atop a stool at the center of the hall, prominently positioned before the professor's table on the raised platform. Harry, Naruko, and the rest of the first years exchanged confused glances, unable to fathom the significance of the hat. With their mouths agape, they watched as the hat began to sing a rather off-key song. While it provided a brief history of each house, the melody left much to be desired. Still, the first years were spellbound. A talking hat was clearly an extraordinary sight, even in the magical realm. Let the sorting begin. The hat declared, drawing applause and enthusiastic cheers from the seated audience. Abbott, Hannah, Professor McGonagall called, scanning the scroll of names. The blonde girl from earlier squeaked and hurried to the front, her cheeks flushed bright pink. She perched on the stool, and Professor McGonagall placed the oversized hat on her head. It slid down over her eyes, and a hush fell over the room as everyone awaited the hat's verdict. Each first year felt a mix of envy and relief. Hannah was the first to undergo the sorting, sparing them from standing in suspense. Hufflepuff. The Hat proclaimed after a moment's pause. Cheers erupted from the table on the second left as Hannah dashed over to join her new housemates, visibly relieved to have her sorting completed. Bones, Susan, Professor McGonagall called next. Naruko occasionally found her last name to be quite frustrating. The long wait times felt particularly tedious, reminiscent of the academy test just a few months prior. She sighed in exasperation. "What's bothering you?" A boy behind her inquired. She recognized him from the boats. He had been included with Draco and his group, yet he seemed indifferent to any perceived privilege that association might confer. "Apologies. My last name is Uzumaki," she replied. "Ah," he said, nodding. "So, you'll likely go just before me. My last name is Zabini." "Then you understand," she responded. "Yep," he affirmed. "I wish they would sort us by last names in reverse order for once," she remarked as a student was announced as a Hufflepuff. Suddenly, she blinked. "Actually, there's one more after me, Ron Weasley," she said, almost absent-mindedly, as Ron stood further up the line. "Great," the Zabini boy said, sounding somewhat bored. "Sorry about that," she offered with a smile. He was taken aback by her openness. Her expressiveness was refreshing, and he had never encountered anyone with what appeared to be whisker marks on their face before. Strangely, they suited her. "No need to apologize," he replied dryly. Harry was finally called to the front, and whispers rippled through the crowd as everyone shot him cautious glances. Despite his best efforts, Harry's nerves were palpable as he advanced. Naruko rolled her eyes in irritation. She despised the way people whispered. It didn't matter that she wasn't the target of their gossip. "Seriously, people. It's not like he wants you murmuring about him like that." "Ugh," she muttered under her breath. Blaise Zabini found her reaction intriguing. "What do you know about that?" he asked, curious. No one likes to be the subject of such discussion. Those who crave attention don't appreciate being whispered about. Most people would prefer neutrality to being talked about behind their backs, she explained. "Isn't he accustomed to it? He is famous. I've heard people say he thinks he's special," Zabini countered. "Those people are fools if they believe that. No matter how famous he is, he would undoubtedly prefer to have his parents alive over any amount of notoriety," Naruko stated firmly. "What leads you to that conclusion?" Blaise queried. "If he desired fame, he would behave more like Draco Malfoy," she replied. "Perhaps," he said, his interest waning. While she was certainly more engaging than most, he was eager to start eating. "Uzumaki, Naruko," Professor McGonagall finally called out. Relief washed over Naruko as she stepped forward. Most of her friends had already been sorted into Gryffindor, and Ron was likely to follow. As she made her way to the sorting hat, she noticed that some students were watching her with a keen curiosity, more so than they had displayed toward others. She speculated that only Harry Potter commanded more attention, though perhaps not by much. "At least they aren't glaring," she thought to herself as she took a seat and the hat was placed on her head. "Ooh. An Uzumaki. Always a delight to sort," she heard a voice that seemed to emanate from the hat. "What's this?" the hat exclaimed, having apparently detected something unexpected. "I'm trying to sleep." A deep voice grumbled in response. Naruko recognized it as Kyuubi's voice. He wasn't fond of conversing and typically only did so when she was visiting her mindscape in front of his sealed cage. "Apologies," the hat whispered internally. "So, you are the host of the mighty nine-tailed spirit. But where to place you?" The hat pondered aloud. "Where did my mother end up?" Naruko inquired. "Gryffindor," the hat responded. "That would be a suitable fit, but it's not the only option." "What about my ancestors?" Naruko pressed. "Your clan members have been sorted into various houses over the years. It's part of the ninja tradition, I presume," the hat answered. "Oh." Naruko replied, intrigued. "Let's see. You enjoy studying, but you dislike prolonged inaction. That would make Ravenclaw a bit challenging, though you might stir things up there. You're determined to prove any rude teachers wrong with your accomplishments, a rather stubborn approach," the hat mused. "Ha! The hat's got you there, stubborn brat," Kyuubi interjected. "Weren't you supposed to be napping, furball?" Naruko retorted. Difficult with this extra voice around, the fox replied lazily, stifling a yawn. "Willing to talk back to such an entity? That's certainly Gryffindor material. You're also fiercely loyal to those you consider important. Your strong work ethic and refusal to cut corners reflect Hufflepuff qualities. She would be proud if you were placed in her house," the hat continued. "So long as I don't end up in Slytherin, I'm fine with that," Naruko replied. The hat chuckled. Oh no. You possess a certain slyness and cunning as a ninja, but not in the way Slytherin desires. He would commend your ambition, though, aiming to be the best ninja and the most formidable ruler among the 5 major villages? That's ambition he can appreciate, but the earlier attributes I mentioned disqualify you from Slytherin. Just as well. I'd rather not be around blonde Sasuke more than necessary, Naruko stated. Draco had been sorted into Slytherin even before the hat was fully placed on his head, his ego quite evident. The hat sighed and said, "It's a pity, really. The Malfoy heir could benefit from having you as a peer, someone who could demonstrate the value of forging connections across various backgrounds and breaking through social barriers. However, Slytherin is not meant for you. Perhaps you can still overcome those barriers," the hat hinted. "Regardless, it must be Gryffindor," the hat declared. Cheers erupted from the table to her right as it was lifted off her head. Naruko felt genuine happiness at being placed in the same house as her friends. While she would keep the hat's words in mind, for now, she wanted to relish the feast with her new companions. Harry and Hermione made space for her as she joined them, sitting between them. "I'm so glad you're here," Hermione beamed. "Same here," Neville added. "I was really hoping you'd end up in Gryffindor. I was worried about what would happen if you got sorted into Slytherin," Harry admitted. "Total chaos. Absolute mayhem. They wouldn't know what to do with themselves after I was through with their house," Naruko joked with a grin. "Hear that, George?" one of the red-haired twins called out. "Yes, George," the other replied. "I guess we're both George today," the first twin continued. "Seems so. Either way." The second chimed in. "I like her already," they declared in unison, laughter filling the air. "Weasley, Ronald," Professor McGonagall announced, prompting more laughter from the twins as they heard her use their youngest brother's full name. It didn't take long before the hat called out, "Gryffindor." Naturally. The table erupted in applause. 3 flaming red-haired boys, clearly Ron's brothers, cheered enthusiastically and congratulated him as he joined Harry and Neville. "Zabini, Blaise," McGonagall called. He was sorted into Slytherin. Naruko hoped this indicated that not all Slytherins behaved like Sasuke's. While she didn't know much about Blaise, he didn't seem to embody that stereotype, even if he turned out to be somewhat arrogant. Once the sorting concluded, the hall filled with applause and cheers. The headmaster, who stood at the center of the staff table, waited for the noise to subside. Professor Dumbledore was evidently well respected by the students. "I have a few words before we begin our feast," he said, smiling at the gathering. "Nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. Tweak. Thank you," he concluded, sitting back down as the students erupted in cheers once more, and the tables filled with a lavish spread of food. Harry was amazed. He had never seen such a diverse array of dishes, all looking delicious. As he filled his plate, he couldn't help but ask, "Is he a bit mad?" "Mad?" "Professor Dumbledore is one of the wisest and most respected wizards in recent history," Hermione exclaimed with enthusiasm. "He can still be a bit eccentric. Many well-known figures tend to have their quirks," Naruko replied. She was well aware of numerous ninjas who, while serious and respected during missions, exhibited unusual behaviors off-duty. Almost every powerful ninja she knew had some peculiarities, though they were generally harmless to the highly trained shinobi of Konoha. "I must concur with you, Naruko Uzumaki. Hermione is correct about Professor Dumbledore, but yes, he has his moments of madness," the eldest Weasley at the school, Percy, added. As the feast continued, students exchanged stories about their families and early encounters with accidental magic. "And then I bounced all across the outdoor gardens." Neville finished recounting his first experience. "Wow. Oh, mine wasn't anything particularly significant. Back home, I witnessed a group of children bullying a girl who later became a close friend of mine. I was just 6 years old at the time. Inspired by a ninja show I had just watched, I shouted some words and made a few hand signs. To my surprise, they all tumbled backward and made a scene," Naruko recounted. The others listened, momentarily taken aback, but Naruko couldn't help but giggle at their reactions. It truly wasn't severe. They literally fell over backward and started croaking like toads, just like Trevor, she elaborated, which elicited laughter from her companions. "You had me concerned for a moment. I'm not sure why, but it struck me as odd," Seamus remarked. He then added, "What about your family?" "I'm half and half. My mum was a witch and my dad a muggle. It was quite a shock for him when he found out. He even asked her if she could conjure a tree or bush that grew money. She actually did. Unfortunately, it only produced play money for Monopoly." His laughter was contagious, and the others joined in. Naruko laughed as well, though her expression turned slightly somber. My parents passed away when I was born. My mother was a witch, and she was even in Gryffindor during her time here, she shared. She interrupted Seamus before he could respond. Don't worry about it, I'm accustomed to it. I'm learning so much about her just by being here. She then shifted the conversation, asking, what is everyone most looking forward to? The change of subject seemed to ease the group's tension, sparking a lively discussion. As the feast drew to a close, the plates were cleared, and once again, Professor Dumbledore rose to speak. Now that we are all satisfied, whether it be with food or, in some cases, pumpkin juice, he said, eliciting a round of tired chuckles. The long day of travel had left many feeling weary. I have a few more announcements, he began. Mr. Filch has requested that I remind everyone that magic is prohibited in the hallways. Additionally, a few items have been added to the banned list. The complete list will be posted on the notice boards in your dormitories. I must also caution you that the third-floor corridor on the east wing is off-limits if you wish to avoid a painful demise. Really? When will people learn that such warnings only invite trouble? It's like putting up a sign that says, hey! You! Yes, you! Don't come here, it's definitely not cool. Naruko mused quietly. Trouble? Us? Never. The Weasley twins chimed in, laughter bubbling up as they redirected their focus to the headmaster. And remember, if you mix potions during your free time, always clean up after yourself. Mr. Filch will be more than willing to find you and make you tidy up if you forget, Dumbledore continued. Furthermore, to our newest members. The Forbidden Forest lives up to its name. You should only enter with an escort, and that is unlikely to happen. Some of our older students would do well to remember this, he added, casting a glance at the Weasley twins. I swear, Forge. They still don't believe us when we say that was just a speck of dust that happened to look like us, one twin quipped. They clearly don't understand how that particular magic dust operates, Gred, the other replied, prompting more laughter and some eye-rolling from their peers. That should be sufficient, the headmaster concluded, calming the crowd with a gesture. Good night to you all. I eagerly anticipate this new year of learning. First years, please follow one of your house prefects, they will escort you to your new homes for the school year. As Dumbledore dismissed them, Naruko felt relieved that they were seated near one of the prefects. First-year Gryffindors. Follow me, Percy announced, his voice ringing out. I am a prefect. The first years quickly gathered around him as he led the way. Each house has a unique entrance to protect it from uninvited guests. In our case, we have the portrait of the fat lady, who will only open if you provide the correct passphrase, he explained. Soon, they arrived at the portrait. Pay attention, Percy instructed, particularly addressing a couple of girls who were giggling as they eyed the boys. Pickled spotted newts, he said. The portrait swung open, revealing a tunnel-like hallway. Once they passed through, they entered a large, inviting common room filled with various couches and chairs surrounding tables. A large fireplace at one end kept the room warm and cozy, adorned in the vibrant colors of red and gold. A grand staircase ascended on either side, leading to the dormitories. The girls' dormitory is on the left side, while the boys' is on the right. You need to be in the common room before curfew. Breakfast is served until 9, and our first classes begin at 9:30. Lunch is at 12:30, and dinner is typically at 7. Although it's not common practice, lunch and breakfast are more relaxed, and you aren't required to sit with your own house. Most still choose to do so, but you must sit with your house for dinner and all school feasts, Percy explained. Any questions? He asked, only to be met with a chorus of sleepy yawns. He couldn't blame them, it had been a long day for everyone. You'll find your names outside your tower's room. Each grade has one room on each side. Good night, everyone, he concluded as the students made their way to their rooms. I call dibs on that one, Naruko declared upon entering the girls' dormitory, pointing to a bed by the window. Hermione selected the one to her right, while Lavender Brown claimed the bed to Naruko's left, and her new friend Parvati settled next to her. Naruko stretched and sighed before flopping onto her bed. As soon as she landed on the mattress, her trunk and Fukami's empty cage appeared beside her. Following her lead, a series of pops announced the arrival of everyone's belongings by their chosen beds. So comfortable, Naruko murmured with a dreamy smile. I don't think it's wise to sleep in your school uniform, Naruko, Hermione advised, concern lacing her voice. You're right, Naruko replied, quickly discarding her clothing except for her stylish underwear, which was a bit mature for her age, featuring bright orange and white colors. Naruko, Hermione exclaimed, her face flushing bright red. That's not what I meant, she finished softly, as Lavender and Parvati giggled at Naruko's nonchalance. I'm too tired. I'll worry about it tomorrow, Naruko said with another yawn, sliding beneath the covers as she began to drift off. Hermione sighed, retrieving her pajamas from her trunk and heading to their adjoining bathroom to change before returning to her bed. Honestly, she murmured as she climbed into her own bed. Despite her initial frustration, Hermione felt a sense of joy as she turned to gaze at her sleeping friend, who appeared remarkably relaxed. It was amusing to her, and more than that, she felt grateful for having made a friend. More than just one friend, even, she thought with a smile before succumbing to sleep. The soft murmurs of Parvati and Lavender's conversation barely registered in her mind. Harry was struck by the impressive size of his dorm room. The beds were not only spacious but elegantly designed, complete with curtains and magically comfortable mattresses. He hardly had time to change into his sleeping clothes before the group began yawning on the way up the stairs, quickly succumbing to sleep once in their room. Even Seamus was uncharacteristically quiet, a testament to the day's exhaustion. Harry felt a wave of relief wash over him, grateful he wasn't sent home for failing to be sorted into a house at Hogwarts. Naruko had assured him that such a fate was impossible, yet he couldn't shake the nagging worry that his peculiar luck would manifest in an unexpected way. He had felt anxious while conversing with the Sorting Hat, which suggested he would excel in Slytherin. He repeatedly thought, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, and in response, it placed him in Gryffindor. The best part was that all the friends he had made were also in the same house. Friends, huh? Harry pondered sleepily. It was a concept he had never fully grasped. While he wasn't overtly disliked, he had never experienced true friendship. Most people hesitated to befriend him, fearing Dudley and his gang might target them. Consequently, he often found himself chosen last for teams, with others opting to avoid the stigma of being stuck with that Potter kid, despite his abilities. Yet here, he already had friends, and their first class awaited them in the morning. Harry sighed, reflecting on his thoughts of friendship. Even if one of them snores like a chainsaw, he muttered just as Ron released a particularly loud snore. He wondered if the curtains offered a silencing option. Despite Ron's thunderous snores, sleep soon overtook Harry. He felt exhilarated about the prospect of his first day of classes and was thrilled that he would share them with Naruko and the others. He had a strong feeling that Hogwarts would quickly feel more like home than Privet Drive ever had. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this content, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to my channel, 6th Weeb. Thank you once again. Best regards. 6th Weeb.